So let's take a look at the designing of the characters part when it comes to 2D animation. Now this I deem the fun part, also the part that takes long because you need to discover what you want to work with. This of course is a subject matter on its own. Drawing a character is not the easiest thing in the world if you do not have the talent. And if you do, it's quite hard for us to make up our minds what we want to end up working with. Now the first thing you need when you get to character designing is of course a pencil and some paper. Before you can actually take a digital, you need to start planning it first. And the best way to plan character animation is to sketch. Rough sketching, doodling, until you find an inspiration. Now, let's take a look at the examples placed here. Within this tutorial, I'll be working with a puppy and a snail, just for the purpose of the demonstration. Now, first of all, the first rule of sketching, of course, is to decide who and what you want to work with. So if you take a look at this example over here, I've got 3 versions of a puppy, or a pooch if you want to put it that way. And then the snail was quite simple, so I didn't really work with a lot of variations there. But here you'll see the 3 versions of the puppy and of course the version of the snail. Now this would of course lead up to character evolution. If we take a look at this, this is basically taking the puppy and the snail together, forming my future animation, basically what I'm looking to create. Also forming the sounds of the mouths I'm planning and the eyes, not very well drawn but gives you an idea. Sounds like O formed in a circle, hey formed more in a side, half moon, a F word formed by lips pursed, the L formed by a little tongue sticking out, and then the different emotions of the eyes. So all these can be drawn, of course, matching up to the puppy. Also, something to look at would be different angles. So in the end I chose this puppy. If we take a look at the example over here, I chose the center puppy because it seems a little bit more characteristic. It's got a little bit more uniqueness to it than the other 2, so I stuck with this one. If we take a look at the example here, here we have the 3 variations. So the most important part of creating characters is to draw, redraw, maybe add some changes, rework, add some characteristics, and then of course this leads up to a turnaround. And the turnaround refers to this example over here where I've got a 3/4 view of the puppy, a front view, and even a back view. Also notice the lines I've used to line up the proportion of the head, for instance, and the feet. And you'll see here I had to make the proportion match up to the lines. This assures that once I take a digital, the drawing will not move or stretch out once it changes position, of course. So work with good proportions when it comes to your animation. Now another important thing would be to also take a look at the form of your character. Is it possible for you to animate this character? Is it easy to work with? I made sure that my ears are floppy, for instance, so I can move them up and down once I get to animation. My eyes are quite big, so I can play around with eyebrows and eyelids and even that little white shine. The body of my puppy is currently sitting down. Now when it comes to animation, more appropriately I'd like to work with a standing animal so I can work with the legs. So the evolution of this puppy will move on to from sitting down to standing up. Also the tail has been added clearly so I can use it for the effect of him wagging his tail, which adds to animation and emotion. So small things like ears and tails can really add onto your animation. So let's take a look at the puppy evolution. So once you've chosen your sketch you want to start your model on, I've chosen the basic puppy with the patched eye, the first 3/4 view. And then of course the first evolution phase would be digital. Now this is of course drawn on Illustrator. The reason for using Illustrator, which is one of the best drawing programs you can get in the Adobe suite, is that you will never achieve pixelation. If I zoom into this picture, you'll see I can zoom in as far as I want and no pixelation will occur. Now of course many designers do like to create animation in Photoshop, but then you have this little issue regarding pixelation once you start changing your sizes. So I recommend sticking to Illustrator when it comes to animation drawing. Alright, so there we have our digital evolution, and then you'll see the final one where the puppy is standing, so I can work with the legs a little bit more. The edges are a bit smoother, and I've used simpler shapes to form the puppy's creation, from pencil sketch to digital form. Now the great thing about Illustrator is basically using the copy-paste aspect. Now once I have my basic form of the puppy like I have here, this one, I've continued by creating different angles of the puppy. So here we have one sitting down, we have one standing up looking surprised, one looking a different direction, less surprised, and one looking straight ahead. So these are different angles and positions. And I recommend that if you do have your first standard form of your animation, also make some different angles, using the same body position but just shifting some of the aspects around. Then of course there's my little snail, a little bit easier to create using very basic shapes and adding a little bit more emotion, like using the shine we have in eyes to add realism, and some eyebrows, which of course isn't natural to animals, but it does add that little animated characteristic. So the first lesson here would basically be take it from paper and pencil and then go digital. So to give you a quick glance or a preview of what you can expect to use with things like angles, I've taken the standard position of this puppy over here, and I've used the heads of the other puppies to make a shift, and this is called a posed shift. So here we have the frontal view, and then of course using the editor, the poses of the heads have been swapped and changed. And of course we can form a little animation. Same goes with the snail. The change added here was a movement using the basic shapes. Alright, so that's what we're heading into, but of course before you can reach this stage, you need your sketches first. Start rough, start horrible, and move up to something a little bit more creative. Add eyelashes, add some smiles, and you can see into the snail I've added some slime even, which is a little characteristic. Small characteristics like even a dog collar, or if you are working with a cat, for instance, stripes, spots, anything that can make the animal a little bit more characteristic. When it came to the evolution, my puppy went from quite plain to a little bit more detailed. In this example, you'll see the puppy gained a collar from here to here and 2 spots on his back to give him just more, a little bit of a more animal puppy character cartoon touch. So play around with those characteristics and you'll have a decent animation to work with. The next tutorial we'll take a look at would be tracing characters. Now once your character has been designed on paper and sketched and changed and added some specifications and you're happy with it, then we need to take it to a digital form. Now to take it to a digital form, ideally you can take your sketch and scan it into your PC so you can use it on your design platforms. Or some designers actually prefer to start sketching on the PCs themselves. Now once you have scanned in your work or you have your drawing ready, your basic little rough work, you need to decide what kind of graphic you want to use before you continue. Now the 2 kinds you can work with is either vector-based graphics or bitmap-based graphics. Now your vector-based graphics are most commonly created in a file similar to Illustrator. Illustrator provides vector graphics, and the meaning for vector graphics is simply clear: no pixelation. So if we quickly switch on the traced graphic, and of course this graphic is easily traced using pen tools, shape tools, and some paint buckets and color fills. If I zoom into this design very closely, you'll see no pixelation will occur. Doesn't matter how close I go to the image. Every single line is quite clear, straightforward, and no pixelation. So this is the, let's say, the pro regarding vectors. Another positive aspect of vectors is they're not too big, so they're very appropriate to use for web-based graphics. So let's take a look at bitmap form graphics. You want to go into the bitmap direction. Now some designers are much more comfortable designing in Photoshop, especially if you are more in the photo editing department. Now Photoshop is not recommended because of the fact that bitmaps pixelate. if we quickly look at the exact same graphic, traced in the exact same way using similar tools, if I zoom in, we'll see that the graphics are a little bit more pixelated than the vector. Well, not a little bit more, a lot. And this can prove negative for any client or for yourself even. So in this case, your bitmap is resolution dependent. So it's important for you to make sure that your resolution is quite high so it has a lot of pixels to work with. But of course, ideally, I prefer working in Adobe Illustrator to create my graphics for any animation setup. So this would be our little rough sketch. Let's take a look at the final sketch of this puppy. And there we go. A little bit smoother, much easier to draw. And the next important part of creating graphics is to create them in separate layers. So let's take a look quickly. You'll see my layers panel is filled with different kinds of layers and even named them personally, like shadow, ear, ear 2, tail, leg 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nose, eyebrow 1, eyebrow 2. So it's very appropriate that you name your layers so you can spot them quick. So let's take a look at the differences. For instance, if I quickly switch the eyebrows on or off, they're on their separate layers. We can take a look at the ears. We can switch them on and off. So most of my layers here are separate. Like for instance the ears. They consist of two parts. So I can use them separately if I wanted to move my ear in a upward direction. I can move it more easily because it's not attached to each other. Same goes for the other ears on the other side. If I quickly take this ear, I want to move it over slightly or bend it slightly, I can create an idea of an animation already. Same goes for the head. If I want to select the entire head, I can also do that. Also tilt the head a little bit, see how it works with the neck as it's combined. Then the legs, of course, also separate. The legs have been created in 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. And this would be the first half of the leg, the second half, and 2 toes to form a paw. Tail also separately attached to the body. Now, separate parts of an animation is extremely important because it gives you much more flexibility with animation. If the drawing is too attached, you will not be able to move separate parts to create realistic movements. For instance, if I want to move eyebrows up and down, I can stop them there and bring them back down so we can get that up and down movement. The tail, if I want the tail to wag, in one instance I'll have it in this direction. I'd rather work with both. In this direction, and then in another instance in that direction, and in another instance slightly more moved. Same goes for legs. If I want to create a walking effect, I'll need to use separate instances so I can create a realistic movement of the paws. Alright, so important is to have your designs in separate segments. So to give you a quick preview of how this puppy was created, I'm quickly going to give you a run through, just very quick. So let's take this design off and let's start on a fresh layer. I'm going to start creating the head. Now, the first thing that you need to understand regarding creating characters is work with your basic shapes to start forming a character. That's how most animation starts. That's how the professionals do it. You start with basic shapes. Now the head is in an oval shape, so I'll choose my oval to work with and fill it, of course, with the appropriate color of choice. Shape it and rotate it in the order I want it. And of course, there I have the very first instance, which is my head. And appropriately, I will name the layer head. Next, I can create the eyes. If I want to create the eyes, I'll also go for an ellipse shape, which is round. Form the eyes. And I will fill the eyes up with a white color, since appropriately eyes inside are white, and just shift the shape. Also very important is if you do build, for instance, an ear, it's important that you build the ear in its full form. To make that more clear, I will take one shape tool, form it in the first direction of the ear. I'll change that ear to a browner color so it can be separated. So that's one half of the ear. Let's move on to the second half. Also bent and attached by the edges. Move them as one and attach them to the head. Alright, and then we have already an ear formed attached to head, and the order of the layers make it possible for me to have a hierarchy form. The head first and behind it the ears. Now of course this can be brought to the front if I just place it on a layer on top of the head layer, and then of course it will be in front of the head. So that is how you start. Basic shapes to form your character, and use as many separate shapes as you can for separate limbs of the animal or person or object you are creating. So now let's take a look at building joints for your characters, giving them more flexibility so you can start working with them once you get to the animation. Now, once your image or your character is ready for animation, you still need to prep it on its segments. Now, segments refer to all the layers, also discussed previously in character tracing. Now, once again, all the layers refer to the different segments of the character itself. You should be able to click on separate parts and use them separately as well. So let's quickly take a look. Here we have a puppy, and it consists of several segments, as you can see the color outlines of all the drawings. So let me quickly show you an exploded version of this puppy over here. There we go. We see the separate segments taken apart, so it doesn't look like a puppy anymore. But you can clearly see the ears have been separated into their two parts. The eyes consist of several parts before it's formed into one, as well as the gray spot. The body can also be taken apart by taking away the neck shadow, and of course the collar as well. The paws consist of two little fingers that can form one once they come together. So this would be an example of your several segments. One of the noticeable parts of the segments would be the legs. As you can see, they are quite long, but they do form into one shape. Once they are taken apart, they become two shapes. Now, overlapping is what's most important within these shapes. If we take a look at the leg of this puppy, I quickly need to remove this leg. If I take this leg off, you'll notice that the connection between the two separate parts would be a circular form in the center. If I take these two apart quickly so we can see the difference, you'll see both of them basically end in a circular form, very subtle circular form, so they can form a perfect joint. Now, circular are the best forms for joints. If they are connected, once the circle is formed, the straight line is also formed for the leg, and no interruption of joints occur. And this is also where you can start using your movement. If the circle stays put, the joints continue in a formation. And there we go. So we have a nice little bent leg. So we can take a look at this example over here. If we take a look at this puppy, we can work with its legs. So if the segments are taken together, it can easily be moved within the body as well. Same goes for the ears. If I want to move the ears, if I take them apart, they also form a semicircle at each end, which connects them quite clearly. If we zoom into that, we can take a look at the movement there. Once the ears are slightly moved, they can be moved to connect in the circle formation once again, and the motion can be completed, forming a perfect connection. So the circular attachments are what's important. That's why working with shapes is easy when you draw these characters. If we quickly also take a look at the neck, if we detach the head, we'll see that the neck is also in a circular form attached to the body. And you'll also see a circular form of a collar to interrupt the line that's a little bit harsh when it reaches the neck. So it's interrupted by something small like a collar. Let's quickly take a look at the little slug, how it's formed, or the snail. Alright, so here we have the snail, also quite simple. The body consists of 3 parts, also ending off in a circular form. So if we quickly take them apart, half circular form, and this can make for an easy slimy snakish movement. Since this is a form of crawler creature, we could easily make with a movement that has to go up and down. Same goes for the eyes. The eyes also end off in a circular form, and once attached, of course, can be moved and manipulated. As long as the circles join up, your animation will look smooth enough to work with. Now, the reason for the circular forms is to avoid gaps and protrusions. This can refer to something similar to this. If you have gaps or protrusions or images interrupting one another, it may not look as appropriate if a little dent is formed because of a movement. And when it comes to circular forms, they are much more appropriate. If we use squares, for instance, which many designers also tend to do, squares do not form the best basis to keep a consistent rotation, as they are quite harsh, because once they rotate, the end might seem fine, but once they rotate, they leave harsh edges, and this can be avoided by using circular forms, of course. So if we take a look at the characters we have created, we can take a look at the different kinds of movement. We can work with the tail, which is attached to the back side of the body. We can work with the feet. You can even work with the little paws if you are confident to play with something as small. You can move them up and down, increase them if you want an extra paw. Of course, that can be attached. And then the snail, move the head if you want to play with it. This gives you a preview of what your animation can evolve into. So that's good to play around with your animations and your separate segments. So if we want to move the eyes, I'm going to attach the eyes and move them forward in the head, back. And as you can see, the eyebrows are playing along quite well. Forms nice emotions. Alright, so that would be basic covering of joints. Very important that you have tons of separate joints when it comes to an aspect you would like to move, especially when it comes to legs or bodies that you need, of course, to provide movement for when it comes to your animation creation. So let's take a look at working with outlines. Outlines can also be referred to as inclines when it comes to character creation. Now this, of course, is a design choice. Some designers prefer to work without inclines, but most of the majority work with outlines. Now outlines can be thick, they can vary, they have different variations from thick to thin, they have fading effects, and of course the purpose of outlines is to give a picture that extra pop, that stand out from the background or from other characters. Also, a little rule, a general rule of animation, the characters in the foreground normally have the thicker outline, where the characters in the background normally consist of a thinner or sometimes even no outline. So let's take a look at the example in front of us. We have a puppy with solid color shapes, no outlines, so there's no defined separation between different parts of the body. Say for instance the legs look completely attached to the body and do not have a clear separation. As for the toes and the neck and the head and the ears. So let's take a look at the difference between no outlines and actual outlines. There we go. Now the puppy immediately stands out a bit more and achieves a little bit of a touch of realism when it comes to these inclines. And as you take a look at my inclines, I personally prefer working with lines that do not cover the entire object but just a part of it, to give it that subtle outline. So it fades from a thicker to a thinner and only covers one part or a section of the object. But there is some caution to be taken when it comes to outlines. Remember, these outlines will follow in the motion that you'll be creating with your character. Now, the motion that you are moving your outline with should have a good harmony with your object. So let's take, for instance, these ears. They have their own outlines. If I want to move the ear into a position upwards, so let's quickly switch on our rotation. I want the inclines to move smoothly and accordingly. If I bend the ear in very far, I should get a neat curve regarding the outlines. Same goes for a leg of the dog, for instance. If I quickly add a rotation here, I would like the inclines to work together. So you can see they follow suit on each other, and of course the toes also match up with a neat outline. So outlines provide a little bit of realism. Something like an elbow crease or a crease in the ear can be achieved using outlines, and it makes it that little realistic touch to the animation. Instead of this, where if I had to move the paw of this character without its outlines, the realism is not really achieved and we only get a separation of shapes. So that's where outlines can be a little bit more helpful and of course make the characters stand out more. Now there are certain ways to create outlines. Many people go for strokes, many people go for the pen tool, but the most general way to create outlines when it comes to character animation, where you want them to work together when it comes to movement, is actually the following. So I'm going to go back to the puppy who has no outline. So let's actually create some outline for him. The first outline I'll be creating is for the ears. Now let's take the first half of this ear. I'm going to copy that, the same size, exactly the same ear, but I'm going to change it to a dark color. Now in this case it can be a dark gray or a dark black, or you can even go for a dark brown if you want to outline it with a dark brown. So I'm going to use a black for now. Then the general rule would be to place this black area behind the original ear. And for that to happen, I need to place this layer below the active ear. So I'm going to move it as far down as I can. And also send the object to the back. Alright, so currently the black ear is sent to back. Now you may be wondering what comes next. Since the black piece is behind the current actual colorful ear, the appropriate thing to do is to just slightly resize the black ear at the back to achieve that subtle black line around the color version. Now of course this can be resized fully if you want a full outline rotation, like the one visible here. We can just resize that down even. There we go. Or you can go for my favorite preference, of course, is the subtle outline. If I take the head quickly, let's duplicate the head. And quickly place the head below the current one, creating a new layer, placing the new one there and changing its color. Now I'm going to go for a dark brown so we can get a little bit more of a natural variation here. Move this dark spot head behind the original one and just move it a bit to the side or to the front, wherever you want your shadows to appear. Movement can create more of a drop shadow. Resizing can create a subtle faded line. So as you can see, if we take a look on the chin, it's slightly bigger here at the chin and moves in slowly with a thinner shadow line. So that would be the most natural way to create outlines. They are actually their very own shape. And to move them together, naturally I just select both and I rotate them together on a cursor line. So that's where you can test if your shadows are actually working together with your lines. Very useful and has a great design effect. I place these inclines over most parts of the character pieces. Say for instance the collar. I would also do the same with the collar. Change it to a darker red even, or to a slightly different color. Make sure this is placed below the current stance of the color, and once again resize it ever so slightly so it just covers a little bit of a thicker line on the outside. And there we go. A little bit of realism. This is also how shadows can be achieved, and this is how you can bring a little bit of a realistic touch to your character. Next, we'll take a look at accessorizing characters. Now, this is basically my favorite part of creating characters. Adding that little extra special characteristic to a character that makes it look either different, but also provides a little bit of help regarding animation. But first, I'm going to look at the things that make your character slightly different from the actual real world or separates animation from realism. So if we take a look at the puppy, for instance, Parts of him that make him unrealistic would be human factors, like for instance his smile. Unrealistic to animals, but can be modeled after human expressions. Also the eyebrows, a very big favorite when it comes to creating animation characters. They always have eyebrows to show emotion, either anger, surprise, or it just hangs there to give it that lively look. Most characters, Disney, DreamWorks, they all create their characters, or most of them, with little eyebrows. Another would be the eyelids. Lots can be done with eyelids, making them open and close, giving them more of a dramatic effect. If you want to make your character look sad or angry, if we quickly rotate that, you can get a different effect with the different angle positions of something like an eyelid, for instance. So we can make our puppet look a little bit more different if his lids are changed. Alright. Then one of my favorite touches, of course, and which is also very unique to very familiar and famous characters, would be the touch of light to the eye. That gives it also that touch of life. Another one of my favorites would be to add a piece of shine to something like a nose, and as we all know, an animal's nose is normally indicated as wet, and to indicate that, we add a little bit of shine to the nose to give it that realistic effect. Another characteristic I've added would be these two spots on the dog's body to give him that slight little bit of uniqueness. Let's quickly take a look at the snail as well. And as you can see, my snail also has two little eyebrows to keep him company when it comes to emotion. And his eyes are my biggest focus because I need to work with a lot of emotion. If I take away the eyelids, he can look much more surprised instead of a little bit bored. So very interesting what a small change can do to something like an eye, for instance. Even if I change these white spots at the center, if I had to take the lids away and I had to manipulate the white spots to be slightly bigger, I can get a much more cute anime effect from this character. Now this would be small accessories that make these characters a little bit more unique. For instance, he's got these little green spots on his aqua colored body and this unique pattern on his shell. Small accessories that make a character a little bit more different from something that already exists. That's also how animators try not to reach a similarity with other characters that they've seen in the past by giving them different accessories. Now, let's move away from the fun part of accessories and more to the useful part of accessorizing. The purpose of accessorizing, actually, and which many people do not know, is to overlap joints. To save yourself that little extra drama when it comes to overlapping lines. If you've ever seen characters, for instance, Disney loves to give collars to their dogs. If you've seen the Flintstones, Fred Flintstone has this very blue collar tie. And for instance, Yogi Bear has a little tie effect around his neck, but he's not wearing a suit. But those are small things that can help with joint lines. Now say for instance the dog, if I have to move his head in a rotation, the angle is at the bottom and the interruption is between these joints. Now at the moment I'm not receiving any issues, but there is a slight little interruption here in the corner. If we can quickly zoom into that. Now this doesn't look very neat, and this of course can be saved by using an accessory. So let's quickly take a look at that. So more appropriately, to avoid that little issue, I'm going to place a collar around the dog's neck. Something small, and it also adds this little pop of color and uniqueness. So let's quickly test it out again. If I had to move the same head of the dog using the same motion, the interruption of that annoying line that separates the neck from the body cannot be seen anymore because it is supported by something subtle as a collar and something that is familiar to audiences. Something like a collar can save your animation from making an overlap mistake, for instance. Let's take a look at the snail as well. Here I have a snail. Now what can we do with the snail? Very simple character, not much to work with at the moment, but we can give him some characteristic. Now let's also take a look at an example of a part of a body that can become an interruption. So let's take for instance his eyes combined with his face and his head. So let's quickly move the snail's head on its axis that we can provide it ourselves. Alright, so if we move the head, we do have a slight, well, it's not a major interruption, but it can become a little bit of an irritation or a worry if the head moves in separate, different kinds of ways. So a little accessory we can add is anything of our own choice. Now I've already created something. I can add something a little bit different, and once again, not animalistic, but more human, a little scarf. So let's use this scarf. Once we add the scarf, put it in lock mode so it doesn't interrupt. We can take the same head again, rotate it on the same clock, and of course the scarf protects those layers against any interruption. And it adds a little bit of a characteristic feature. A snail with a scarf, it's a little bit different. So there we go. This is what you can use when it comes to accessorizing. They help you with your joints. They can give a little bit of a unique touch to your character, and comes very useful when it reaches overlapping joints and adding a little help where we might be too lazy to fix it, or it already works, but the overlapping, once the joint moves too far or too close, can cause a little bit of an issue. And that's when you decide to add an accessory. Now once again, there are many kinds of accessories. Currently we are working with animals. If you take a look at human characters, they have jewelry on their arms, cufflinks on their hands. Even some animals received human-like clothes, for instance, to cover up those joints. We have hats that can help with ponytails, and of course shoes. Anything that you can add to help with your joints can count as an accessory. And of course, the world is your oyster. There's a lot to work with, and play as much as you like. Enjoy! So now let's take a look at the next important factor of animation, replacement animation. Now this refers to having different parts that you can swap in and out to make your character appear in different ways. This can refer to talking, different forms of the mouth, blinking, different versions of eyes, moving your tail, different versions of a tail, different versions of a hand opening and closing, so different instances of fingers, anything you deem that can offer change, but in the same position and can be easily replaced by an instance slightly different than the previous one to bring on an effect of movement, for instance. Now, in order to make, for instance, the snail, let's take a look at the snail here. In order to make him talk, I want to give him an effect of talking. I need more than just this little smile he currently has. So in order to make my little snail talk, I'm going to have a bunch of different mouths. So let's take a look at all those mouths. There we go. I have a little bit of a collection here. An O-form mouth, one with a slightly of a red effect like a tongue inside, a flatter mouth, and one that contains teeth. So let's just quickly take a look at those differences. If I remove the current mouth, well, actually the appropriate thing would be just to move it out of here, and let's replace it with the circular form. Then we immediately have a different look. It's almost like he's saying a sound like O or oo. So immediately there's a little bit more of a realism going on when a different mouth has been placed. Let's place another one. If I had to replace that one with the smile, the toothy smile, let's take a look at that. Alright, suddenly it looks a little bit more cheeky. So it's great how you can use replacement animation to form a motion. Once we get into a different platform when they can be used in different keyframes, the effect of talking can be achieved. Now, basically, your job would be to create several versions of the same instance and replace them and see if they work. Now, as you can see, my mouths are in a similar proportion. They're not too big and not too small to match each other, and of course fit easily on the snail's face. So that's what you'll have to look at, a good proportion. And as well as replacing, is it placed in the same position the previous one was? And then you get more of a smooth transition. So another thing we can look at is something like the eyes. So currently my snail has big googly eyes, and let's quickly add some realism to that. We can add some lids. Eyelids can be added for more of a dramatic effect. And of course, easy to work with. You can just duplicate your eyelids if you want to play with that and rotate them around. So there we go. We have two eyelids. You're kind of looking a little bit lazy at the moment, so let's replace that. remove the current eyelids, and maybe place an eyelid that's a little bit more sophisticated. In this case, it's got lashes. So our little character looks a little bit more female at the moment. But that is what you can use to replace your animations with. Let's use another one. A slightly smaller brow can be used as well. And a little bit slightly bent forward to have more of a sophisticated look as well. So that's quite nice how you can replace certain instances to create different emotions. An instance can also refer to movement. Say for instance the eyebrows. If they moved up higher, our character immediately looks a little bit more surprised. If they moved closer, a less surprised look is achieved. Alright, so that would refer to your replacement animation. So let's quickly take a look at an example where the replacements are used in a sequence and of course work almost as if the character is actually talking. So I'm quickly going to show you an example of how those replacement animations can be used to form a character animation in motion. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm using Flash CS6, which is a great form of animation editing. So I'm quickly going to go into the instance where our head is, and of course the head contains the mouth. Now I have two layers here. Now the bottom layer would be the mouth, and the top layer would be the eyes, corresponding as the snail is speaking. So the first instance, let's zoom in a bit so we can see clearly. The first instance is a slightly open mouth. The second is a circle form of a mouth. Once again, the slightly open, closed, and the eyelids are lifted. Circular form, a slight smile, open and big eyes. And this, of course, forms up to a conversation. Now, sound is also something that you should take into consideration. If you think about it, if you make the sound O, your mouth goes into a circular form. If we say hey, your mouth goes into a smile form. If we say P or F, your mouth closes up into a pursed lip. And this is how you can start styling your mouths according to the form you make when you make a sound. So let's go back to scene 1 so we can quickly test and see if this character is actually talking. And there we go. Looks like he just talked. I'm going to quickly play that again. We play the movie again, we'll see he is talking there. So if we quickly switch off that action, put it on loop so it looks like he's continuously talking. So if we test this movie, there we go. Constantly, just a loop, of course, the eyes are constantly opening and he looks like he's talking a lot of nonsense at the moment. But that would be a good example of using replacement animation to start motion. So now we'll take a look at your first setup in Flash, where you will actually start with your animation. So by now you should have some replacement animation ready and your character should be in full creation on your platform, which can either be vector or bitmap, of course. Now currently I have my vector graphic, which is my puppy, which I'll be using for the purpose of the demonstration. Now, first of all, we need to get our animation from Illustrator to Flash. So we have to get started in the setup. So I'm going to open Flash CS6, which is the vector platform I'll be working with to create my animations. Now, first of all, we need to get our Illustrator file, and the quickest way to do that is to go to File, Import, Import to Stage. And then, of course, I go fetch my puppy file. And as you can see here, the layers visible in Illustrator, where we created our character, is fully imported into Flash the exact same way. And you can isolate a few of them if you don't want some of them visible, but the full layers can be imported into Flash. Please make sure that if you do use this function that you have your convert layers set to Flash layers and place object at original position. So your object will be placed as it is in Illustrator. So if I click OK, you'll notice the puppy appears on my stage, and I can move it appropriately, quickly resize it as well, place it in an appropriate spot. And if you take a look at the timeline over here, you'll see every single layer, similar to the one in Illustrator, is imported into Flash. Now this of course is quite great because you can work with every single part again, but this can make confusion. Now there's a way that we can compress our little puppy to be in less of separate layers, but still able to use all of them separately. Now this might sound confusing at the moment, but let's quickly take a look at it. First of all, we need to start saving our objects as symbols. Flash works appropriately with symbols when it comes to animation. Now, symbols are easily converted by selecting what you need to convert to. So I'm going to work with, for instance, the ear first. Let's take a full selection of the ear, both the background part of the outlines and the outside colors, the ears alone. So once they are selected, I'm going to press F8 on my keyboard, which takes me to the Convert Symbol dialog. Also, the other way is to go to Modify, Convert to Symbol. So either use your F8 key or Modify, Convert to Symbol. Once I've reached Convert to Symbol, I'm going to give my symbol a name, Ear 1, obviously a name that I can easily spot. The type is set to a movie clip symbol, which is quite flexible in editing, and I click OK. Now immediately my ear has been placed. You'll take a look at your library section within the symbol window. So technically, I can go delete my layer and my current existing ear, and my symbol will always be available. But let's just continue with one more section. Say, for instance, the eyes. I want to make a symbol of the eyes. The eyes consist of 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. And I would like to make that 1 because I'm going to use this eye as 1. So I'll be selecting these 4 parts together using my Shift key, pressing F8, and of course convert this to I1. There we go. Our eye has been converted to a symbol. Same we can do for the one next to it. Since this eye has a patch attached to it, this can also be converted to I2. So currently I already have 1, 2, 3 symbols ready for use. I'm going to continue with this. I'm going to also make the face a symbol, but the face alone, not adding to the eyes. F8 and say face back. And there we go. Now appropriately, in the end of all this, you should be able to delete all these layers and import back what you have replaced. So if I delete the current ear, I'll find the layer and I will also delete that layer. I can find the face layer and delete that layer. Same goes for the eyes. Find the layers and delete them. So for instance, the lid, which is on its own, is not necessary in this case. I do not need that separate layer. Even though I deleted them, I can create brand new layers for them and start by naming the layers accordingly. Ear 1. And I can drag ear 1 in, and it is the perfect ear that I have replaced. Add a new layer, face, and drag in the face as well. Exact the same proportion can go on with the hierarchical structure, but instead of 2 separate ears, I now have 1. Now to chase away the scare you might have, what if I need to move my ear up and down? Where's the separate ear layers? Quite simple. If you double click on the symbol, it takes you to its original form in its own very own timeline where you can animate with it. And of course, here we go. If you were unsure about that, here I can still animate my character. Let's move that corner up there, and here I can still make use of my symbol movement. But in scene 1, we have a combination. Now we also have something called, let's just make 2 more layers for the eyes. 1 layer for both eyes. 2 is not necessary, so I'm going to move in one eye and move in the second eye. So I have 2 eyes, an ear and a face. And then we can create something called nested layers, nested symbols. If I select the symbols I've changed together, I can modify them to become a symbol as one. Head full. And then of course it's a symbol on its own. But also if I double click on the symbol, it takes me to its original state. So if I delete this head, the full facial head is still available in the background. And of course, you'll currently see my head is overlapping the images at the back. So of course I could just change the structure of my head and place it on a lower layer. And of course you'll see the mouth appears in the front. And so your structure can also be continued. Now layering is extremely important. Now this will take you quite a while. You can create symbols from every single part of your character. In the end you'll have to create symbols of the legs alone, symbol of the tail, symbol of the body with the spots. The spots can be included because they won't be used for animating. So make a body symbol. Once again, moves to the front can only be moved to the back using a hierarchical structure. Your collar can also be converted to a symbol. Now, just to pick up the slack of this demonstration, I've made a final complete of the puppy, and you'll see my layers have been limited to the head, neck, leg, back leg, body, tail, back leg, and another leg. So it's quite simple. But if I click on one of these layers, for instance, say the head, it identifies all the layers active, all the symbols active within that layer. Same goes for neck. With the neck, I have the collar and the neck. With the legs, the three separate parts of one leg. So this would be the appropriate stacking order of my layers regarding Flash. And once again, the symbols are not removed from each other. If you go double click into one of your symbols, you'll be able to edit the symbol in full. And of course, it still has its original separate parts. And it comes with its very own timeline where you can animate within. So if I need to animate the face containing the mouth, I can make different instances of the mouth within this section. And the mouths can be replaced on their own. So that would be the first example regarding animation preparation in Flash. So to recap, once you've imported your character, make as many symbols of separate parts as you can. And you can make symbols within symbols called nested symbols. Once you have separated all of them, for instance, I can make a complete symbol of this puppy alone. If I select him all together, I can make a symbol of the puppy as one. And there we have a full puppy that I can drag in at any time using as a duplicate. And if I would like to change him, I can simply double click on this puppy and it goes into its separate states. So using symbols, very useful, very quick, and of course it preserves all these files once again. If I'm not happy with one of the mouth's instances, I can remove it and drag in a new one, and it will always be available to me. So have fun with this aspect because it is a lot of work, but very satisfying and very useful. Next, we'll move on to replacement animation in Flash. So we can actually put it to the test. If we want our little puppy to talk, we can work with different sets of mouths to put it into motion. So first of all, we need to access our puppy file, which has now been neatly organized in separate symbols that we can manipulate on their own timelines. So of course, if we want to change the mouth, we have to go to the head symbol. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see clearly. So you can see my head is one symbol. I cannot select separate parts now, but once I double click inside, I can select separate parts of the head. So this is what I'll be working with. So I'm going to double click on the head section, and currently the head can be found in one layer. So I'm just going to name that layer full so I know and remember that that is the layer containing all of the separate parts. But because I'm going to add different mouths, I want it on its own layer. So I'll be adding a new layer. I'm going to call that layer mouths. And because I'm going to add different kinds of mouths, I'm going to remove the mouth on the full section because I want to work with this on its own layer. So I'll be cutting that one and placing it on the mouths layer. Let's just move that in here. All right, great. So now on my full layers, I have all the separate layers, and on the mouths layer, I'm only going to work with different mouths and instances of a movement when it comes to this character talking. Now, I've already imported the mouths I've created in Illustrator, also imported to Flash, easily imported and converted to symbols, of course. And I've made a folder in my library, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 mouths. So I have 8 different instances of this puppy talking. So we are going to add these instances per keyframe. Now first of all, I need to add a new keyframe to this current layer by using the F6 key. Once placed, I'm going to remove the old mouth, and as you can see, if I go back to the first keyframe, the old mouth is there, but on the new keyframe I need to replace a new one. So my mouth was slightly smiling, so I'm going to place a new mouth that is a different form, and we can quickly scrub through those to see the different formation. And I will continue by adding another keyframe and removing the old mouth. And if I go back, it's still there in its old keyframe. So in the new one, I'll be placing a slightly opened smile. We can scrub through that to look at the difference. And I'll continue the same way. Remove an old mouth and replace it with a new one. Add a new keyframe, remove the old mouth, and place a new one. Now, as you notice, keyframes indicate change. If you want a new instance, you need a new keyframe. Let's add another piece of mouth. And then of course, as you can see, I'm going from a slightly closed mouth to much more open in the end. So as you can see, starts with a slight smile, moving down, opening up, forming an O sound, smaller O sound, surprise sound, large, loud sound, and this would be the ridging of the different kinds of replacements. So in order for this character to talk, let's take a look at its test. To order of it to talk according to a sound, obviously you need your different kinds of sound motions, but that you can of course create in your own form. So let's quickly scrub to see this again. There we go, on its own layer and the different kinds of mouths. Then, as you notice, I just placed these mouths as I went along. But for appropriate animation, it's important to align them according to the previous alignment and in the same position. So I would slightly move this one up a bit. That one as well, I'll have to move this one up a bit more. And of course you can work with the properties, X and Y scaling if you want perfect proportions. But of course we're just creating a hypothetical character here, so there's no worries regarding positioning for me now. Alright. Then, once you are done, I'm going to go back to scene 1, which contains the entire puppy. And we can actually quickly test and see if that talking motion is working. So if I click on Control, I want to test the movie in Flash Professional. And there we go, it's actually talking very fast. We can of course manipulate that at a later stage, but yes, the replacement animation is working and the dog is talking a lot of dialogue at the moment. But there's another thing we can take a look at. We can actually go identify specific areas of the mouth that we want to see. So if we select the head section, I'm quickly going to convert the clip from movie clip to a graphic so I can work with the loop aspect. Now in the loop aspect, I can immediately select single frame because I want to go to a specific single frame. And if I click on 5, it goes to the 5th instance within that frame. So the 5th frame was the small circular mouth. So that gives you a slight example of how you can use looping to go to that specific keyframe. So with this looping effect, you can use your keyframes, and then it of course leads up to reaching your replacement animation. So now I'll take a look at one of my favorite aspects of Flash animation, and that refers to the bone tool, where we can work with armature regarding arms and legs. So this is where we would go into the direction of a hand that's waving, legs running, and movement that goes into a motion, but specifically looking at joints like arms and legs or an entire body, for instance. So for the purpose of this exercise, I'll be working with my snail character, who has a very nice snake-like body that I can work with specifically for an armature tool. So I'll be working with the bone tool, and the bone tool in my tool section literally looks like a little tiny bone. And you'll see I'll be selecting it at this moment. Now, the bone tool creates relationships between joints or parts of an animation where you can connect them and then move them, and they will create a smooth motion if they are correctly connected, of course. All right, so first things first, I'll be selecting the body section. And as you see, this body section consists of 1, 2, and it can also be connected to a third-party connection. So using the bone tool, I'll start at the center point of the first body half, move to the point of the joint, and continue the movement up to the second joint, which is the head at the top. And currently it connects 1, 2, 3 parts. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to take my bone tool and connect from the center point of the first joint, connect at the first connection, and then at the head. And I'm more or less guessing where that connection is, where the scarf, which is my accessory to cover up any unwanted lines, is lying at the moment. Once that motion's been made, you can test it by taking your selection tool and moving your body down or up. And a smooth motion can be created using this tool. You can pull any part of the character up or down, and of course move it upwards and downwards. Now, as you can see, our movement is slightly flimsy. Now, this is caused by a lack of joints. I only have 3 joints to work with. The more joints you have, the easier it is to work with. But you can also work with your properties panel. If I go to my properties panel and I click on one of the joints, you can see that you can work with the following options. Location, you can change the positioning, or you can pin down. You can even pin down certain sections of an animation where it won't move if you don't want it to. So I'm going to pin down the bottom half. Select pin, and if I move the head, the bottom half stays down, but I can move the head and the centerpiece continuously. So this bottom half is pinned down without any interruption. Now these pins can be taken off, of course. I can unselect the pin. Also, we can take a look at joint rotation. If I enable joint rotation, the rotation has been switched off, so now our character can only move back and forth. But I'm going to enable it again because it's much more easier to work with a rotation effect. You can also constrain your rotations. If you only want a minimum of, let's say, 45, minimum 45 to maximum 180. If you want to take that as an example. So you can only rotate in that formation, not further, as you can see. So our little snail has a little bit of a restriction set to it. But those restrictions, of course, can be taken off. You can also work with the X translation. If you want to move this in a back and forth, maybe pull it a bit, which is very possible. So there's a lot of options to work with when it comes to your bone armature. And of course, the ones I like to work with is the pins. If I pin down a section, it's easy for me to move a part of the character that I don't want to move as well. So I want his body to stay bottom at the lower bottom. So what I would be working with mostly with the snail is the downward position, moving forward. And if he needs to look up, I'll make him move upward like this. So that would be the perfect way of using my bone tool at the moment. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration. To set this to motion, I'm going to quickly add a couple of frames to my timeline. Now using the F5 key, I can quickly add a timeline. And you'll see Armature has created a layer of his own once you've added the bone tool. And now I'm going to place my playhead in the center because I want this animation to occur through a motion. As the plate's in the center, I'm going to move the body of my snail upwards and position it until I'm happy. So I like this position. Now you can quickly look at the animation by moving the playhead and see how he moves from down to an upward position. And I can move the player to the end and take that position back down. And there we go. Now we have an up-down position. So it almost looks like he's a little bit doing a little bit of a dance. So if we test that movie, you'll see he's moving up and down while he's smiling. And this indicates that an animation is occurring within an animation. which is quite great. If I double click on the character, you'll see within the animation we have some motions going. So basically this would be using your armature to create a motion. The best would be for separate joints. We can also take a look at the puppy character. An example has been created here where all the legs have been created into a motion. So if I test this movie, you'll see it looks like, well, not a perfect run, but almost there, going into a run motion for this puppy. Well, I hope you have some fun playing with your armature. I certainly enjoy playing with armature, and it really gives more of a realistic effect to our character. Let's play that slug one more time, and there we go. Already looking like a real animation.